I'm going to just do another introduction of myself for anyone who doesn't know me already, introduce my company. We're going to talk about agronomists and ag data analytics in general. And then I'll go over some principles, some high-level principles on data management tips in general for using data for analytics. And then the last part will go into FieldX and talk about a few key setup steps that you can take to make sure that your data set is going to be useful and collected efficiently as you go through the season. All right, so my mission at DXD Ag Insights is that we're going to be using simple data visualizations and advanced data science to help agronomists solve problems efficiently, so that ultimately we all can work together. You, me, your growers, FieldX, other players in the industry can create a better future for the agriculture industry. So my background, just to introduce myself personally, I've worked with, before starting DXD Ag Insights a little over a year ago, I worked with FieldX for about 8 years, helping David Kruger set up, get FieldX moved from the desktop-only Field Recon platform into a more complete, cohesive ag data platform that would sync across different apps, as well as continuing to work on the PC. Before that, I grew up in Minnesota, central Minnesota, on a dairy farm, and so that's kind of how I stuck in agriculture through my whole life, starting out, milking cows, and now working on technology and data. So our focus at DXD Ag Insights is on the agronomist, and everybody on this call, from or almost everybody on this call is an agronomist in the US or Canada. And that's really the player in the agricultural value chain we're focusing on. And there are a few reasons for that. So first, data and the data that you're collecting and putting into FieldX is really an extension of your experience and your expertise. Nobody has that. Nobody has the data set that you have that's on your local fields that is most relevant for the decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, nobody has your insights that you can pull from that data. So the value proposition of ag data analytics generally for agronomists it kind of boils down to a few, and I'm not going to spend much time here today on digging into these value propositions. Just want to mention that there. So first is to offer differentiated agronomy services, and the fact that you have insights nobody else does. You can communicate with your data, better explain your recommendations, better improve those recommendations over time, and then ultimately save time, whether that's the time that you're spending digging into data at the end of the year, or time spent, time saved when you're better targeting what fields to visit and what actions to take. So when we're thinking about analytics, and especially using FieldX data for analytics, there are several directions that we can go. And I just want to make sure this is clear right up front, that there's not just one answer to how you set up FieldX and how you do ag data analytics as an agronomist, because there are multiple different parameters to explore. You can look at yield. Of course, that's kind of the report card at the end of the year that ultimately determines, how much revenue that grower is going to get, and in many ways is the default score, if you will, on a field. There's pest pressure and how well pest pressure was managed, stand counts and emergence early in the season, quality metrics like protein content, or other similar metrics like that for wheat or whatever crop you're working with. And then finally, profitability. If you have the data on how much that grower is spending and are very deeply involved with helping them, and they're willing to share that level of detail to help to allow you to get to those kind of insights. And the data underlying those that we can kind of look at and in the context of those metrics to explore would be things like planting details, when the crop was planted, what variety was in the field, how many seeds were out there, which products were used and when, which herbicide program, which fertilizers, how much fertilizer was put out, pest pressure, which pests were in the field, which ones were the most severe and widespread. Soil types and the fertility levels, so soil test data, things like that, and of course the actual soil types from the USDA Surgo database, or if you have kind of your own determination of what a type is in the field or in a certain zone. And then weather, of course, that's a big one. And weather, and when we work with weather, we're actually breaking it up into different parts of the season, because just having enough rain through the whole season isn't often enough for that weather variable to be explanatory to what happened. You know, it's weather at certain times of the year, whether that's precipitation, growing degree units, extreme heat days, those kind of factors. So just real briefly, I'm going to talk about some examples of analytics and kind of just both descriptive analytics and then some machine learning that have been run using FieldX data as a base, along with other information that we brought in on the side. So this is an example of an output report. This is what we call descriptive analytics, where you're not doing a model on this. It's just looking at the data as it is, pulling it into one spot, and then being able to explore it and manipulate the data to understand what's going on. So the two examples here are yield by soil series and yield by variety. These are filterable so that if you're trying to hone in on the performance of a particular variety across a certain year or a certain seed or a certain soil type, the idea is these kind of data analytics tools can help you narrow that down and get to the specific data and the specific answer that you need. Another example, again, in the descriptive category here, one is the average yield by GDU. So this is looking at total GDU and the average of corn yields in this case, and kind of plotting out what that looks like. So there are analogous charts to this, looking at not only total GDU, but total precipitation, GDU in the first 20 days of the year, days 20 to 60, and 60 to 90, or something along those lines. I don't remember exactly, but the idea is try to break up that season, that weather data, by the crop calendar. So how many days after planting was that weather experienced? And then over here we have just a table, tables to explore the data, filter down, get to some of the specific things you need, where things are kind of aggregated and you're not having to sift through every single scouting entry, for example, but just kind of seeing some top of the line metrics, like how many herbicides were put out, how many times was that crop condition rated as good in the field, those kind of things. So so again, this is at the descriptive analytics level, where we're really just taking the data as it is and putting it in a way that you can look at it, get some value out of it, and interact with it. And then the next level is using machine learning. And a common misconception with AI machine learning is the idea that you need big data in order to do these kind of models. And that's just not the case. And in fact, the amount of data and the number of observations that agronomists are making in a year, the average agronomist is making, is more than enough to get some value out of out of the types of machine learning models that we're using. So the specific model that I've worked on and that we have is a model that essentially predicts previous field performance. And then today, we're actually not using the prediction. We're actually still looking historically. And what we're doing is pulling out the top factors that contributed to that field performance. And that, again, that performance might be yield, it might be stand count, might be which fields handled pest pressure better, which fields responded to certain treatments better on down the line. It's set up to be flexible to solve the problem that you guys bring to it. So in this one, the top factor actually it was planting day. And if you look at just a generic scatter plot of the planting day by yield, it looks like chaos. But the way that the machine learning model works is it runs through 100 iterations of the model. It tries to do essentially, in this case, a regression type model. And then it keeps pulling out variables. And then it sees, well, was that model better than the last? And then it will continue to iterate like that until it gets to the one that is best. And then it essentially is still measuring, well, what if I pulled that variable out? What would change? And that's how we can determine what the actual impact of a particular variable was. And then from here, you as the expert, the local expert, takes that to the next step to determine, okay, what might be missing from the model? What can't be in the model that I know, like a grower preference, like, some event that happened on particular fields. Those kind of things then come into play before you use that to ultimately make your decision using your own data. All right, now let's get into the next piece of the agenda here and talk about some high-level data analytics concepts and data management concepps. And like I said, as we kind of go through, feel free to put anything in the chat. Be monitoring that and be glad to answer any questions. All right, so you have to kind of bear with me. This does get to a little bit of higher level, a little bit of theory on how to manage data best for data analytics, but I think it's going to be useful kind of framework for you all as you kind of think about what you want to do with your data in the future and what your immediate next steps are to achieve those goals. So the first thing is start to think about what you want to answer. What are the burning questions that you have, that your growers are asking you every year as to why certain fields overperformed, underperformed expectations? What specific decisions do you expect to be making or have made in the past where the impact is maybe less certain, or you don't have a way to prove that, for example, planting earlier for soybeans yields a positive impact. So that's kind of the first piece, is start to jot down, in your notebook or whatever you have, to just brainstorm. What were the questions that I want to answer? So, examples like we kind of went into before would have been like, well, what is the impact of a planting day? How can I convince my growers to plant earlier? Another question is, what's the impact of tillage system on emergence, on yield? Are there certain soil types that handle certain tillage better or not? And these questions don't have to be ones that you are clueless about, that you don't have any idea what might come out of it, but they might be things where you already have an intuition as to what the answer might be, but maybe your growers aren't understanding it, or there are other things stopping your growers from making crop management practice changes that are suboptimal. So if you guys like, share some ideas and on things you're thinking about in the chat there. We can kind of get some cross-pollination of ideas going. Like I said, we have agronomists on the call, mostly independent agronomists from across the US and Canada. So there's a great group of brains here gathered. So, all right. And then once you have a question or set of questions, doesn't have to be one, the next thing is to work backward to what data is needed. Very often people start with the data they have and then try to find out what questions they can answer. And that has value too, and that's part of the data exploration step, is really just understanding, well, what is here? That's really an important step in the whole process. But it's most effective when we're talking at the beginning of the season, like we are today. Let's get a plan in place for answering the questions that you have. So the idea is that we get to convert that question into a hypothesis, and then we test it using and by tested I mean we use real world data. We observe and we help the computer help us find patterns in the data based on what actually happened in the field or what happened in previous years. So think about how things are being explained today. You know, where does intuition and you know, we always did it this way dominate in decision making? And is there an hypothesis? And is there a data set that you already have that could help answer that question or bring another level of sophistication to that decision? And then the last thing is, are certain practices or conditions most important to note? So tillage time, planting population, certain things that happen during the season, like soil crusting, you know, especially if you're looking at like emergence, certain pests, certain growth stages that you want to know at the end of the year what happened to that crop during those growth stages, because you know it has a certain impact or a particularly important impact on the crop. All right, so I'm going to talk about quality of data. And before I get into this, just want to mention there is no perfect data set. So it's easy to let the perfect be the enemy of the good in terms of actually using your data and starting to dig into it, because you know maybe you didn't do a good job for a couple months last year, or you know things got busy and certain templates didn't get changed before the season started last year. Whatever it might be, there's always things like that, and there's usually, not always, but there's usually ways to handle that. So for example, with yield access, if you don't have the files, or the files are not high quality because of equipment issues, we can use yield categories to start to kind of dig into, again, what's the probability of being high or low yield, high or low stand count, things like that. There are other things that can be quickly categorized at the end of the season. So that's just kind of the main point, that there's no perfect data set, and it's easy to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So there's a question here about rotation affecting yields from Amy, and yes, so that can be an input into the model. That can be or into the tables and charts as well, either by filtering by prior crop, by just having prior crop be one of the variables that's that's charted or in the model itself. And it might even be back to 1 or 2 seasons, depending on kind of how you want that to be set up. And of course, so that planting data being in FieldX helps to make that happen, to be able to pull in variables from not just this year, but variables from prior years that impact this year's performance. So, so the idea with quality data is that you have data that's both relevant and reliable for the questions that you're trying to answer. Relevant means that the data is actually telling you something about what you are hoping to learn. Reliable means that the data is telling you what you think it's telling you, that it's not misleading you. So some of the gotchas where maybe the data is either not relevant or not reliable, one or the other, it could be if perhaps some test plot data was grown in a completely different growing condition. Maybe it was grown a state over, maybe it was grown in different soil types. Second point, maybe those test plots that are meant to inform you on what varieties, products to use, maybe they were treated differently. Maybe some of your own test plots even that you've set up were treated differently. And in certain aspects, you don't want to apply that across all your fields. So that's kind of one frame. And I pick on test plots because it's an easy example that's used frequently in agriculture, where there's a good data set there, but we have to think about when and where that data should be used. And where some of your own local in-field observations across years might be a better source of information. And then the last piece is just, is the data getting to me in the right time frame? So there are definitely data sets where, and data, of course, you're using every week through the season to get your growers information and recommendations on what to do. But is that data accessible at the end of the year when you're trying to look back through things? Are there satellite type or even drone data? Are the measurements taken from those getting to you at the right time? Or are there other ways to kind of get the answers? So let me move on before I get bogged down on this too much. All right, and then the last kind of tip here, and sort of leading into demoing some specific features in FieldX, is to be as consistent as possible and as efficient as possible. And the main way to do that right now is to use the features available in FieldX. Today, I'm going to cover these 4 features. Many of these, I'm sure, are not new to just about anyone on the call, but there have been several changes. There may be some tips, kind of along the way that still would be useful for you as a good refresher on how to optimize the way things are being used. And then the last piece, I just want to kind of mention this very briefly. One of the pieces that we do, or some of the value of using different dashboarding tools like what we're building, is you can kind of get some indication of how you're doing on data entry through the year using these kind of charts. So this is a real quick example where you can kind of think of like in Apple Watches, there's like the circles that you fill up, if you've seen those, where you want to walk enough, take enough steps so that you fill up all your circles and get your exercise. Well, same kind of idea can work with your data, that you chart out each week or even daily or in real time, kind of what data is entered for the field and what data might be missing. So this is an example where variety, there's 20 fields out of 88 total that have a variety. The remaining do not. So if you're in June and your chart looks like this, that means quite a few people, either on your team or yourself, didn't get the variety in, or you didn't get the variety information from the grower, whatever it might be. So the idea is these kind of tools and dashboards can give real-time feedback that can help make sure that your operations are consistent and efficient. So any questions, any other questions before I jump into going through a few basics in FieldX? All right. And I should mention, so today I'm really most focused on setup. I'm not going to go into the iPad application really at all. The ideas, the principles of how to set these things up are all in FieldX Office first, and then you're able to leverage the pick list, the templates over in the journal app, as well as using batch update over there. So just a heads up as I kind of get into it. I'm just gonna work on the PC for now. All right, give me a moment. I'm gonna pause sharing for a second and get over to FieldX. There we go. Okay. So you should all be seeing my a very basic sample FieldX database right now, and I'm just going to go through, like I said, those four kind of basic pieces. So first, pick list, and then talking about templates, and then batch update, just to make sure everyone's aware of that feature, so that this data entry can be quick. And then lastly, I'll just kind of touch on planting, a little more detail, just because that's such an important piece for using your data later. So, all right. So I've got these fields up here in Minnesota, and in order to best use a platform that is going to be able to tie together the total amount of certain chemicals you're using, to understand how prevalent a specific pest is, and all of that good stuff, you're going to want to be using the pick list feature in FieldX. Because if you're just using the comments, someday we'll be able to parse all that and make sure that to match up, all the possible misspellings around up. But today is not that day. We really using the tools that are feasibly available for today. It really works best to make sure that every time you're using a particular chemical name or a particular pest name, it's spelled the same and kind of has its own reference ID, which is exactly what the pick list feature does in FieldX. So I'll just jump into this briefly and go into just a couple examples here, and there have been several changes to this feature over the last 2 years or so. So I'm sure most of you have been in it since it's changed, but just kind of to make sure that everybody's on the same page with how this feature is working. So let me start with crop. Crop is a very important piece because, of course, when you're looking at field performance, comparing corn fields to cotton fields and trying to get something useful out of that isn't going to be the most useful exercise to start. So these are the crops then that are going to be available in your journal entries, and you can click add item here to add a new item from the reference library. So if you go through, there's about 32 reference items here, and you just be able to simply select the one or multiple, actually one at a time, it looks like, sorry, that you want, and then move that over into your company pick list. So let's say I'm going to do some spring wheat here, move that over, hit OK. Oops, sorry, missed a step. Oh, sorry, I did not miss a step. I got mixed up for a second. All right, so now spring wheat is there. So that I added from the master pick list and moved it over. Now, there are going to be times when you need to use a non-master list item, non-library item it's called. And if you need to do that, you would just click here to add that non-library item. It's ideal. So the best case scenario is that you're using the FieldX reference library for your pick list items. The second best scenario is that you just enter it in with a non-library item. And that way, then everyone in your organization is going to be consistent. So let's just say, I don't know, I'll do carrots. Add that, press OK. And then I've got that now to include. Now the other, before I leave the pick list manager, a useful feature in FieldX is this crop model for GDU. So each crop, you can specify which GDU model should be used, because you're going to be able to later on add your accumulated GDU to your various data entry forms. And of course, depending on where you are, depending on the particular crop, the growing degree units are going to be calculated differently. So this is where you would specify that. You can explore this on your own, but before I leave it, I just do want to make everyone aware of that feature so that you can sort of have some weather data and specifically GDUs at your fingertips when you're working in FieldX. So for field corn, I set it up to be modified averaging. You can see the details here. I'm working in Fahrenheit, and then the base temp is 50 with the max temp being 80, or cutoff temp being 86. So that's the formula that then will be used anytime I'm trying to calculate GDUs and accumulated GDUs on a field that has field corn in it. Okay. All right, variety. So that's next here. Now, people who have been using FieldX for quite a few years, which are many of you, you know that there hadn't been a reference library for varieties in FieldX until last year, I believe, is when this came in. Might have been the year before, but anyway, so here you're able to go ahead and add an item, select the crop that you want to add it for. So let's say cotton. Okay, and then I have my reference library here. Now only the first 100 items are displayed, so you might not see the variety that you want, and if you're just scrolling the list, so you'll just have to search for it. So let's say, Dyna. See, that's one of the companies there. I want to search the company for Dyna, and now I have all of the 42 varieties from that company. So I'd be able to select the one that I want, move it over into my company pick list, and then from there I'll be able to include that in my my forms and my templates. So as you can see, it has a name, it has the company, the traits that are in there, and then it also has the years that variety was active. So, okay, so that's it for what I wanted to talk about with varieties. Now, let me check the time here actually first. So, jump over to chemicals for just a moment here, because there are a few special things here. Of course, all these other pick lists, especially like insect weed disease, are going to be useful, but I'm going to skip over that for the moment. So chemicals also have a reference library with the same kind of setup that we just went through for the varieties. So you're able to go in and search for the one that you want. Okay, that'll narrow down the list, and you'll see, for example, 35 different variations of 2,4-D that have, different product names, different company names, and all that good stuff. So let me just add these granules here, add that to the company list, and then I'm able to, go ahead and add a different one. I don't need to do it one at a time like I have been doing before. So, okay, so that's one thing. Of course, you have that reference library. Like I said, best case scenario is to use that reference library and make sure that you have the particular chemical with a reference item, registration number, and everything that you need. Now, the next piece, when it gets to starting to make sure that the data entry is quick, is to start thinking about min default max rates and the units that you want to use. So the default application rate can be set for a chemical, and that can be set to whatever you need it to be. So let's say this is 20 ounces per acre. In FieldX Office, that'll then come up automatically on the form. Now, the units here are also very important. So even if you don't set the default, come in and set the units here, because it'll save you a couple clicks to get to the drop down for units and the actual selecting the unit when you're in the field. Clicks in Office, or so that's one important thing when you're going through adding chemicals. The product container units and cost. Now, cost, of course, would be if you're trying to track, what the end cost would be. But then the units are how this is totaled up. So if you want to total it up in pints when you're doing your output reports, you can do that here. So, or maybe it's a 5-pound container. So that's kind of when you're starting to do some digging into the data, just using the existing FieldX reports, looking at the totals of a certain chemical across fields, things like that. So those are the two I'm going to highlight here. There are definitely other data fields related to chemicals here that you can put in, but those are the two. As far as just getting a consistent and efficient data set, that's where you might want to spend some time. Okay. All right. So let me talk about templates now. Templates are very helpful and important to make sure that you're getting the data in that you need. So I'm just going to go into plant entry as my example. Now, right here is one of the places where you can get to field weather, where you'd be able to see weather for a field, as well as that GDU based on the calculation that we put in for the crop. Not going to click on it. I don't have a crop yet in this field, so it's not going to show me the GDU, but it will still show me the temperature, high, low, and precipitation. All right, so when we're setting up ourselves for using the data at the end of the year, we kind of have an idea of the things that happen at planting that we need to know about in order to answer the questions that we have. So think about that. Once you kind of have that list in your head, that's when we kind of come in and create a template. And the idea, the basic idea or best practice, at least in my view, is that make this form as simple as you can that still has all the data that you need. So to change the data fields that are here in the planting data form, you go up to the data fields button and then just take out any of them that you don't need and add in any that you do need. So, for example, we can start as simple as possible and just start with crop and variety. If that's all that you really want to focus on the variety, and you want to make sure that you're not spending much time on that planting entry, and maybe you don't have the other information around planting, then just have a form that can be that simple, and it would look like this, where it'd be just crop and variety. So let's just start and save an example that's this simple. So I can go in and I can go, my Zoom thing's getting in the way here. All right, go in, click template, and then I'll save this as a planting template. Now, when I do this, there's another option that comes up here, and that is to check mark which data fields that are required to be entered when you create a planting entry. So this is where you can start to enforce some of the data quality that you need, especially if you're not the only one entering the data. So let's say I'm going to name this the super simple crop and variety form. I can save it company-wide so that my whole team has it. And then let's say I want to check mark all three of these and make sure that everything on this super simple form is entered when I use that template. Okay. And then what'll happen is when I create a planting entry, I'm going to get an indicator that this kind of indicator here, that these fields are required, and I won't be able to exit this form or save the form unless I fill them in. So the idea is to make sure that you have the data that you need. Now, it's not always going to be best to require every data field. In fact, most cases it might not be, because maybe you don't have all that information yet. But in general, this is going to be a good way to make sure that people are putting in the data that you need. So, all right, so let me close this and open a new form, a new planting form, and let's talk about another, kind of a second planting template. So in this one, let's kind of get a little more detailed here. So instead of just the crop and variety, so let's say I want to do a few more data fields. Let's say I want to make sure I know which seed treatments were put on that field, because maybe I want to compare the performance of those, or maybe I want to compare the stands of the fields that had certain seed treatments. Let's say I want to use the have the planting rate and tillage system. Again, to look at and compare what the difference in performance and kind of interaction with tillage system. Okay, and I'll remove any others, and I'll leave planting depth in there as well. So let's say we have this still fairly simple form, but now with 6 data fields instead of 4. And then now, when I go and save it, and I save this planting template, I probably want to be a little more picky about which ones are required. So I for sure want the crop. And you know what? Maybe that's the only one I really need. You also, let's say, want area planted and crop. Those are the 2. And then the others are nice to have, or maybe they can be added in later. It's kind of up to you and kind of the process that fits best in your business as far as how that planting entry is done. I'll save this company-wide. Oops. All right, and then that's kind of set up there. Now, the other kind of thing to note, and one of the things that as you're going through the season, and maybe you realize you don't have the planting entry yet from the grower, you don't have the exact details, but by then you know what crop is out there because you're out checking it. You know approximately when it was planted because you know how far along the crop is at a certain time. There's a very useful check mark here called start date is estimated. So when you're actually in there and entering your data and you don't have the exact details, just check that box. This is an example where, you know, making sure that you have the perfect planting date before you enter the data is the enemy of just having a good planting date and having an estimate. So just another tip there on the planting side. All right, so I'm just going to exit this here. Again, as we kind of go through, feel free to ask any questions that you have. We've got about 10 minutes left, should be able to kind of get through things, and then we can chat, have a few minutes for questions at the end. All right, so now let's talk about scouting and recommendations for a little bit. So I went through a lot of just general, the idea of templates. So now let's talk about kind of some specifics on how to do it for scouting and recommendation entries. So, again, the idea here, kind of starting with field conditions and going over, is to make this form as simple as you can, so you can enter it quickly and efficiently while still having the data that you need. So if I go into data fields here, I can go in and remove or add any of the specific data fields that I want. And it's best practice to have at least one template for each crop, since there are different data fields that you would be using and interested in, kind of depending on what crop is out there. You can have templates for different times of the year, since there are different things that come up in crops from time to time, depending on where it is in its progression. And then, of course, there's if you don't deal with irrigation, you can take out the irrigation data fields, add them in if you are managing irrigation. So let me just kind of go in, and I'm going to remove most of these. Let's say I want to keep a soil moisture rating there because that's something important I want to go through. And let's say I don't have irrigation, so I'm going to get rid of those and just do one generic kind of soil moisture rating. Okay. And then for crop observations, here we can get into the specific crop that we're working with. So I'm going to create, let's say, a corn template. So I'm going to do corn stages, and then it will be the corn stage list that comes up automatically when I select this template. And let's go into data fields, and maybe I'll take out a few of these. Say maybe it's late in the season, I want to do some kernel counting, add those in. I want to know some things about tasseling and kind of the tassel percent on certain dates. And then maybe some of these others I'll take out. Okay, so the idea is simplify that form as much as you can. And then for crop injury, insect disease, and weed, the name of the game is to pre-fill these for the specific things that you're going to be looking for and worried about. And then enforce, what this will also do is to make sure that everybody is using the same scale. It's very important if you want to use pest data for data analytics, because you have to, there are ways to deal with this again, but in general, you're going to get the best data on crop injury, insect disease, and weed, and best insights later if everybody's using the same scale. Okay, so let's say we're going to do some frost and oops, go in and do that kind of rating. Insect disease and weed, again, most of this probably isn't new, but I've got my pick list here set up. I've got the units that I want to use. Let's say I'm going to do the count for 10 sweeps. Okay, and then when I'm setting up a template, I don't put in the numbers. All I'm going to do is put in the pest itself and then what unit I'm going to do. And then in the field, it's just a matter of typing in the numbers or selecting the rating from the drop down. Okay, same with insect or weeds, excuse me. Inches. Okay. All right, so that's the idea. I'm just going to save a basic scouting template. And then here again, we have our decision as to what data fields are required. Now, in a lot of cases, it might make sense to do growth stage. Growth stage is probably the one on here, just based on things that I've heard from people and what they've wanted to look at. It's very useful to have growth stage in there every time. Now, another kind of wrinkle in that is there are sometimes very specific growth stages that you want to make sure to have somewhere in each season. So you know when that growth stage was hit, or approximately what week that growth stage was hit. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. There's not like a rule that you have to have, you know, an emergence growth stage in FieldX or anything like that. But when you're kind of reviewing the data, when I review the data with you, that's something I'd be looking at, is if certain growth stages that you're targeting are somewhere in that database. And then with chemical fertilizers, these are the recommendation templates. They're the recipes. So it's very helpful to be able to match up, you know, the effectiveness of a recipe, let's say, when you're using a template, to make sure that it's kind of the same across a certain group of fields. Of course, these need to change when you get into the season and all of that good stuff, when conditions change or the needs change. But having some of this kind of set up in front, what the rate would be, all of the tank mix partners right here, that's going to be very helpful in making it quick to get that detailed recommendation out to the grower, and to be able to identify specific products that were used through the season, you know, again, as opposed to these just being in comments and being sent to the customer. So let me go ahead and save. I'll just save this one. Okay, and then now want to talk about batch update. So this is a very basic thing. You'll be able to go through it very quick. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this feature, but if you're not, you definitely want to be familiar with it this year because it's an extremely useful way to use FieldX. So you have your template. I'm just going to apply it here. And let's say all these fields are corn. Okay, so I am using this form. I know that the crop variety across all these fields was this one. I know that all of these had conventional tillage, and I know they were planted at 2.5 inches deep. Okay, so what I did, just to kind of take a step back, I opened these together. So I went in to create journal entry, hit plant while all four of these were selected. And I selected them by clicking and dragging, but I could also use the control key to select them. Okay, I'm just editing one form. And then what I'm able to do is go over to batch update, go into here, select the types of data that I want to copy from this field to the rest, press OK, and then it went over and applied that same data across all four of those fields. So it's a very quick way to get data across dozens of fields all at one time. Okay, and then let's say something changed here on field 4. I could only do 2 inches for whatever reason, or I needed to do 2 inches depth, and it wasn't conventional. This one was a reduced tillage system. So I can go ahead and specify that. I'm not stuck with what I started with. Just like when I apply a template, I can still make changes after I apply a template or apply a batch update to a set of journal entries. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click save this collection of open forms. I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm going to close this form that I was using to set up my template. Don't want to save those changes. And then now when I go in and look at my journal, and have the right dates here, all dates, I've got my planting entries here. And if I go into my field overview, I can see that these fields were planted in corn. Okay. All right. Now, one other piece before, and this wasn't on my original agenda, but it's very important. When you're starting a new crop season in FieldX, in order for this crop to be correct and for the program to know that it's a new crop season and it shouldn't be looking back at the prior planting information, what you need to do is create a begin crop season journal entry, and that just draws a line in the journal to mark one season from the next. And batch update's very helpful here because you don't want to do a batch update in every single field individually. So I'm going to go in to a begin crop season here, press OK. I selected, oops, I just had one field selected. Well, anyway, it works the same with batch update, but the idea is, let's say I want to start the season on March 1st. Everything after March 1st applies to the current crop season. Everything before applies to previous. Save that and close it. And now when I go back into my journal, I'm going to see that orange line there. That's the beginning of the crop season. And everything afterward will, like I said, be the current crop season. The crop from the planting entry after that will be shown as the current crop season. So, okay. Now, the other piece that just, again, want to mention here is there's a couple tabs up here under list. There's Journal Template Manager. This is where you would clean up and kind of view some details about your journal templates. So if you have a bunch of old scouting templates or a bunch of old recommendation templates you're not using anymore, definitely recommend going in here and either just copying them to your private list so that your whole team isn't getting templates that aren't relevant for them, and then delete them from the company list, or just delete the ones that you're not using anymore. The idea of company-wide versus private is definitely something that's useful, so that employees aren't being confused about different things that they need to or don't need to enter. So, okay, just real quickly on that. The other piece here is the default template for each entry. So let's say that I want a default cotton template. So I can select that basic scouting template, and that's going to sync to other computers that are logged in with your username. So each user comes in and sets this up, and then that way it's not even going to take going in and applying the template. That's automatically going to come up. So, so that's it on the FieldX side. Everything was pretty high level here, and now it's kind of up to you to take the next steps and determine what fits for you, what and then again kind of go through that process of thinking about what data you want to further explore at the end of the year. And just real quickly, and then we'll wrap up, did want to mention kind of the way I'm working this season in my company, DXD Ag Insight. So what we went through before were examples from my platform that for beta users. Now, we have three kind of levels. I have three levels where I'm working. One is data management coaching. So that's digging in with you, going through the things that we went through today in a ton of detail to make sure that you get on the same page with your team and kind of with yourself on what you can do with your data at the end of the year, what you want to do with your data, and then work backward to what data you need and how to make sure that FieldX or other systems that have data are being set up and managed so that you'll achieve your goals going forward. The next level is doing some descriptive analytics for you. So combining FieldX data with other things like other weather streams, other soil types, processing additional information to create some charts and tables. And then there's kind of the full analysis with working with the machine learning model, which is essentially just the very important piece about that. That's just working with your own data. We're not doing any modeling across everybody who I'm working with. It's only using your own data. And there's no kind of mixing data or anonymizing data or anything like that. You have enough data yourself to be able to run those kind of analytics. So $500 a year to kind of dig in and do that consulting. Think of it, it's not tech support, it's more strategy type consulting. And then I would actually be able to actively dig in and help get things done as far as getting that set up right. Scriptive analytics is $1,500, say per location, but for, of course, independent, most of you guys, with the exception of, well, a few, are going to be one location. So it's essentially $1,500 an org, and then $3,000 a location for the full thing. For 2022, just to walk before I run, I am kind of limiting the number of customers I work with on the actual analytics piece to make sure that I'm delivering and hitting home runs for the ones that I do work with. So if you're interested, let me know as soon as possible, and we can kind of talk further. Now the other next step here, I guess, you need additional assistance or want to dig into things in more detail, I've set up like office hours, is what I call it. But it's essentially just a chance for everybody to kind of throw some time on my calendar to go over things in more detail, for 30 minutes, talk about your specific situation, specific goals, all that kind of stuff. And that is completely free. I'm looking forward to catching up with more of you guys and kind of talking about, well, one, just learning what's new with you and your family and your business since we talked last, and then the other piece is to make sure that I'm able to help. So that's it for kind of what I was going to go through today. I'd be glad to stick on for questions, but I want to respect everybody's time since we did go over just a few minutes. But so that's kind of it, unless anyone has questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. No need to put it into the chat.
Hey, Tim, just a question. Is there a way where when fields change in size, that when the planted acre is put in, that it will match up with the like the treated area later on for a recommendation? I just seem to find that there is times when the planted acres for a particular field aren't the same year in, year out, that I have to keep referencing back with that change to make sure that the acres are right to the treated acres match the planted acres.
Yeah, so the setting to check on with that, the most common reason for that to happen, and this may not be what's going on in your situation, but there is under options, let me just kind of start again, under options, and then area default on data entry forms. This is where the recommendations are getting the acres. So if your acres change at planting and you want to use that, then what you'll want to do is grab, click on this area last planted. from the most recent planting form and move that up to the top of the list. And so what that'll do then in FieldX Office at least is it's going to look at the area last planted from that planting form first, and then automatically put those acres into the recommendation entry. And then that acres that are in the recommendation entry, that's what goes into the reports. So this would be the first place that I would check. And then what happens now is it's first going to look at that planting entry. Next, it's going to look for the GIS size from the field border. And then it will look at the field size from the field attributes tab. That's how that works. And this is a local setting. It's just on the FieldX Office installation. But that's the first place I would check, Chris.
Okay, thanks. Just wondering, can you run that pathway again? Just the order. Where did you go for that?
Yeah.
Options.
So options, and then area default on data entry forms. And then area last planted is the one.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim.
And then John had a question. Any chance to pull John Deere Ops Center into FieldX? So that's not active today, or that's not been implemented. So now on kind of the analytics side, if you were interested in using that data, I'll be pulling that just for the purpose, kind of the summary data for analytics like yield and the details of the applications. I'll be kind of pulling that in on the back end, but I know that's something that FieldX itself will do as well. I just don't have a timeline on that today. And yes, Cole asked if the recording of the meeting will be sent out. And yep, I will send that out. It takes a little bit of time to kind of process and all that good stuff. But I'll be sending that out hopefully today. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for the time. It was good to reconnect, and I'll send a follow-up email, and one of the things I'll kind of include some more information about my company, include the recording, and then if there are other topics, related to data analytics that you want, you're interested in kind of going into deeper, be glad to schedule more of these type of webinars and discussions with you all. So, all right, thanks a lot. Have a great day.